Here we have the most corrupt government probably in the history of Canada. And what is their response to billions of dollars given to their friends? It's Harper's fault.
As a famous sorcerer once said, we're in the end game now. Talk of Trudeau's corruption, not government bills, dominated the House today. Liberals were making nonsensical defense attempts, and we confirmed behind the scenes what is actually happening.
Let's take a look.
Orders of the day: privilege, standing in the name of Mr. Scheer, alleged failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, resuming debate on the amendment of Mr. Berthold.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now I'm continuing my debate from last night before I was so rudely cut off by the Speaker last night, which I think was you, actually. I think I have about 6.5 minutes. Last night I was talking about, of course, the reason we're here today, which is the government's refusal to hand over documents ordered by Parliament, by all three parties on this side of the House, regarding the green funding scandal. And of course, people are asking which green funding scandal, because only the Liberal government can be so corrupt that they actually have subsets of their scandals. We have 3 ongoing right now. There's Environment Canada grants and contribution audit scandal right now, where they list off lack of government or governance issues, ineligible grants given, including to such companies as Rio Tinto, fine Canadian company, but they have been noted for a lot of environmental concerns, but they're also worth $220 billion US, and yet this government is giving them millions. Other companies, Cement Lafarge, received billions. Another one, Holcomb Group, which is worth $30 billion, has received millions from the government. And of course, there's the other scandal around the Green Accelerator Fund that the Auditor General had pointed out. One of the issues is they had that companies were receiving funding without actually showing what they were actually going to do to reduce greenhouse gases with that. Also, the Auditor General noted ineligible companies, no due diligence being done before $8 billion given out. Now, here's some of the companies that received some of that $8 billion. Algoma Steel, which is worth $2 billion. And these are the companies that were noted by the AG that did not have proper paperwork, did not possibly even be eligible for the funding, but still received it from the Liberal government. So Algoma was worth $2 billion, received $200 million. ArcelorMittal, which is worth $329 billion, got $400 million. Foreign company got $400 million from the government. FCA Canada, Stellantis, on top of their billions they received for batteries, worth $55 billion, got $500 million more under the net accelerator.
So this is that corporate welfare that we were talking about previously and during our interview with Franco Terrazzano, that these companies that are worth billions are getting tax money from Canadian taxpayers like you and us, and the government's just handing it to them. The last one, he listed $55 billion this company is worth. So those shareholders are worth goodness knows how much. How much money do you think those guys are getting every year in bonuses? And they're taking money from the taxpayers.
Well, the worst ones of the ones he's mentioned so far is a foreign company worth $343 billion, and they received $400 million of taxpayer money. And this isn't the SDCC scandal, by the way, folks. This is a different scandal. This is the Green Accelerator scandal. So you have just incomprehensible amounts of money.
You know, you have Canadians who are having to go to the food bank. You have Canadians who are having to keep their homes at very cold temperatures just to save money because of the carbon tax. And you have to have, like, you have Canadians who are having to live in tents. Like, but our government thinks it's fair to hand our tax money to these $1 billion companies. Billion.
Now, the interesting thing is this debate is supposed to be focused around the SCTC scandal. But Macaulay is talking about the Green Accelerator Fund, which doesn't have to do with the SCTC scandal. Why? We'll get into that in a minute.
Goes on and on. These 8 companies, including Pratt & Whitney, which by the way is worth $250 billion, received 61 million. These 8 companies are worth over $1 trillion and receive probable ineligible funding from the government. Now there's a line that I want to point out here from the Net Accelerator report from the Auditor General. Now keep in mind again, the Auditor General pointed out this money was given out without proper due diligence. This money was given out without companies or even the government figuring out if they were going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the billions given by Canadian taxpayers.
So all we hear from Gilbeau and all we hear from the lawyer, Mr. Champagne, and all we hear from Trudeau is we're investing in green technology, green energy, we're fighting climate change, and we're doing all of these stuff to stabilize everything. This is what they're saying. Meanwhile, you have all of these companies receiving billions of dollars, billions, and they haven't even put forward in their applications how they're going to be using this money to fight climate change. Seems a bit weird. Seems really weird.
I don't know if weird is the word I would use.
Oh yeah, corrupt. That's the word.
One.
The line is from page 8 for those wanting to follow along at home. A project above 50 million also requires Treasury Board approval, concurrence letters from ministers of other departments, and cabinet approval, but it can be fast-tracked with a letter to the Prime Minister.
So, first off, thank you, Mr. Macaulay, for providing us some direction there. Took a little bit to find it, but we ended up finding it. So, what is he talking about? He's saying that any amount that is awarded to companies over $50 million has to go through a horrendously long process. Let's take a look at that process. So it's this big, long process, and has to get approvals and be evaluated and all this stuff.
Well, one would hope so for that kind of money. And it's, again, it's taxpayer money, right? So you would hope that the government is doing its due diligence and ensuring that whoever receives that money deserves that money.
But there's a section at the bottom that's in convenient fine print. What does that say? That says, a project of more than $50 million also requires Treasury Board approval, concurrence letters from ministers of other concerned departments, and cabinet approval, which can be fast-tracked with a letter to the Prime Minister. Where does this come from? Well, this comes from Minister Champagne's departments, the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada department. So you have these huge amounts that are able to just be fast-tracked through this process with a letter to the Prime Minister. And he just says, sure, off you go. So you have a bunch of these companies that are being paid to be green innovators that are worth billions of dollars already, that don't need any more money to do this, but we're giving it to them, and they haven't even proven what they're doing with it. Interesting.
So we have 8 companies noted that received funding up to this $8 billion that were probably not eligible. The Auditor General herself stated due diligence was not done. Companies received money that were not eligible. Companies applied and received money despite showing no plan to reduce GHG emissions, but can be fast-tracked if it's above 50 million by the Prime Minister. Algoma Steel, which I noted, above 50 million. Stellantis above 50 million. Nexstar Energy, also Stellantis above 50 million. General Motors, which is worth 70 billion, also got money above the 50 million. So I have to ask, what was Cabinet's role? What was the Prime Minister's role? Was the Prime Minister involved in fast-tracking it? I'd have to ask that, and I would probably answer yes. Because it's clear from the government's own rules, these companies were not eligible. And yet somehow they got fast-tracked to receive the money through the Treasury Board, through Cabinet, and fast-tracked through the Prime Minister himself.
Wow. Our tax dollars hard at work, folks.
And this is like we said. How much more is there?
Well, and I guess I just want to know, what green projects is GM working on?
Well, they're EVs, of course.
But Canadians don't want EVs. They don't really work well in our climate.
Well, and why are we funding private businesses?
Well, and that's the other thing. Maybe we should make something up and ask the Prime Minister for $50 million.
Right? Well, apparently you don't even need to. And it looks to be, the more you ask for, the easier it is to get it by the sounds of it.
Like, this is just ridiculous. You know, I joke, and I think I have to make jokes. Like, if I didn't, I would cry. Because, like, again, this is our tax money. Anything above $50 million, they're fast tracking. Anything above that amount should be slowed down, not fast tracked.
Well, and the Liberals are saying, what are you guys going to cut? What are you guys going to cut? Sounds like
Stuff
there's
like
lots.
this.
Sounds like there's lots.
2 million Canadians lining up at food banks, veterans having to rely on the Veterans Food Bank Association of Edmonton, veterans having to go to a food bank, and yet $8 billion fast-tracked by Treasury Board, Cabinet, and probably the Prime Minister himself. Taxpayers' money going to large, profitable corporations worth $1 trillion without probably even being eligible. And then, of course, we have the Green Slush Fund, where the Auditor General points out that Liberals turned Sustainable Development Technology Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders, $53 million given to 10 ineligible projects. Of course, this seems kind of small peanuts compared to the accelerator scandal. $250 million given out to 186 cases with projects which board members hold a conflict of interest. $58 million to projects without ensuring contribution agreements were met. Recurring issue with the government, the same issue with the contribution agreements from Environment Canada. So we have the House, the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP all demanding that the documents related to the third Green Slush Fund, for those trying to keep track at home on their scorecards, it's a third one related to the Sustainable Development Funding. Asked for the documents to be turned over to the RCMP. Parliament has the supreme privilege in this case. The government doesn't get to decide, bureaucrats do not get to decide what can be released when Parliament demands it. The government is covering up. The government is refusing to hand over the documents despite the will of the majority of this House. The government must learn that Parliament is supreme, not the Prime Minister's office, not the Prime Minister, not Liberal members of Parliament. Parliament is supreme. It's time for them to stop the cover-up and hand over the documents.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And this is what this all boils down to, folks. There are some good things about how our government is actually constructed. And one of them is the supreme power of the House. The House gets to order the government what to do, especially in a minority government. So if the House orders that the government must turn over documents, if the majority of the MPs vote on that, then the government has to do it. They don't get to say no.
Because the will of the House is the will of the people.
Right. So the government is trying to like, oh, well, you know, it's infringing rights and blah, 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 blah. And they're running around like, you know, those tube guys at the car dealerships. That's what they're running around like. But nobody's buying it. Nobody believes you, because what you're doing is just gaslighting, and you're trying to scare people that the big bad Conservatives, never mind the fact that the Bloc and the NDP also agree with them, the big bad Bloc and the big bad NDP, I guess.
The small bad NDP, the small neutral NDP.
Yeah, there's a bunch of jokes we could go down, but those wouldn't be parliamentary. But all of them all of them agree. And they keep using these ridiculous arguments, which, you know, we'll address again when they come up. But sorry, it doesn't matter. Hand them over. You don't have a choice.
And I do want to just take a moment to say that I really appreciate the way Kelly McCauley is breaking the fourth wall and referring to viewers at home, because this is a very important scandal and Canadians are watching. So Liberals, we're watching and Canadians want justice.
Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, think of it in this sense. The Conservative Party on corruption, and this is just a short list: anti-terrorism, Phoenix scandal, G8 spending scandal, the E&TS scandal, the F-35 scandal, the Senate scandal, election scandals, plural. You might find this hard to believe, but not once did the Conservative Party ever go around collecting all the data and then shift it right from their offices over to the RCMP. Not once. Instead, they took the approach of burying it as far as you can underground. Madam Speaker, now we have a Conservative Party that believes they're better investigators than the RCMP. They're saying, let's gather the information and shift it over to the RCMP. Who cares about the Constitution and Charter rights? My question is, where was this enthusiasm when the Conservatives were in government to get to the bottom of the huge number? I just cited a few, Madam Speaker, of those scandals.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Here we have the most corrupt government probably in the history of Canada. And what is their response to billions of dollars given to their friends? It's Harper's fault. Why didn't Harper do more about it? It is a disgraceful response from this member who's been here long enough to know better. I'm going to quote from Michelle Bedard, who's the law clerk and parliamentary counsel, the House of Commons. There is no limit to the right of the House of Commons and of its committees to order the production of documents, providing that the documents are available in paper and electronic form and are in Canada. The power is subject only to exceptions and limits explicitly stipulated by Parliament. It's very clear. Parliament has asked for these documents. Parliament decides, not the member from Winnipeg North, not the PMO. Parliament decides. Parliament wants to get to the bottom of this scandal. The government needs to comply with the order of Parliament.
I love the rebuttal there. Oh, yeah, it's Harper's fault.
It's always Harper's fault. You know, the Liberals give billions of dollars away to their buddies. It's Harper's fault. What a bad guy. Oh my goodness.
Well, and listen to the argument that the Liberals are trying to put forward, right? It's so telling. It's so telling because they're not trying to refute what happened.
No, they're not.
That's the fantastic thing about this. And I don't mean fantastic as in amazingly good. I mean fantastic as in just
insane.
I'm shocked. So they're not actually trying to refute that all of this corruption is going on. Their main argument is, no, don't turn that over to the RCMP. That's what they're trying to say.
Their argument is that, well, you know, the government before us did all this bad stuff, and instead of holding ourselves to a higher standard, it's okay that we do stuff that's even worse. That's what their argument is. It's like a kid who got caught taking a cookie out of the cookie jar and was like, well, Bobby did it too.
Well, and you have to judge each government on their own merits. So, and many of these Conservatives weren't around in the Harper era. Many were. But we're talking about literally the most corrupt government in the history of Canada. Like, if you look at the Wikipedia page, it just keeps adding line by line by line by line. They make up 1/3 of the entire list of all scandals that have happened to a Canadian government in the history since 1867. So, if you really want to compare the track record there, Lamoureux, I'm sure the Conservatives would be happy to oblige you.
And can I just say that Lamoureux looked even more unhinged than he normally does? I think this is bothering them all. I think they smell the blood in the water.
Yeah, he kind of looks like groundskeeper Willie when he loses his mind on The Simpsons.
It's a monster! Kill it! Kill it!
Honourable Member for Terrebonne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague, who I sit with on the Public Accounts Committee, for his speech. It's an important subject for me, and I think it's an important subject for him. The lack of transparency and the lack of accountability from this government to Crown corporations. When they put money in Crown corporations, they can do pretty much whatever they want. And in the case of the foundation, that's a bit the problem that we're seeing here. The department put all responsibility and accountability on that organization in this issue. And we're talking about $1 billion of taxpayers' money. And we know that a lot of that money has been mismanaged. I'd like to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that.
I'd like to thank my colleague from Public Accounts for her comments and her question. She has done a fine job searching for or fighting for transparency from this government. It's clear from all the witnesses we've heard, including a whistleblower, the Minister of Industry was aware, the government was aware, Liberal MPs were aware, and yet at every point of bringing the information forward, the Liberal government suppressed this information. The government has got to come clean. It makes you wonder, they are allowing days of their agenda to be sidelined to protect the government from releasing this. You have to ask, what are they trying to hide that they're willing to sacrifice days and days of their legislation being held or debated in the House in order to cover up? Are they protecting the Minister of Industry? Are they protecting the Liberal government? Why are they not doing their job and protecting Canadians and taxpayers instead?
That's an excellent point. No government likes losing time in the House because they only have so many days to put through legislation and put through their agenda. So the fact that they would rather hold on to these documents and lose days in the House, because we don't know how long this is going to go on. It's one day already. We'll see how much longer it goes on. But they would rather lose days to introduce legislation and to finish up the legislation that they're working on than they would to hand over these documents to the RCMP.
Well, and this is the core of it, right? Macaulay asks a very pertinent question. Because they are losing this time, and because they're not delivering for Canadians, as they keep saying that they're trying to do, this is a big hit. Big hit.
This is huge.
And even the talking heads on the political shows, well, I guess we're a political show, but
and we are talking heads.
on the mainstream media, even they say this is bad. So, what is going on here? Well, here we come to the crux of it. Why are they doing this? And why are the Conservatives essentially doing what they're doing? So what this all is this is the end game. So a strategy is being employed by the opposition, and they are using this time in the House because government can't do anything. They are using this to air all of the dirty laundry of all of the massive scandals that the Liberals are currently embroiled with. And the whole point of that is to educate Canadians, to ensure that Canadians are aware of what's going on, all the corruption that's going on, and to get Canadians to pay attention to all of these scandals. Why are they doing that? So that when the Bloc get their no from Trudeau, which he fell into their trap the other day when the party had to vote no against their motion, the Bloc and the Conservatives will then use the SDTC scandal, as well as all of these other, pile them all up, wrap them in a big bow, and then you will see the real confidence motion. The past couple of confidence motions that have happened,
They've been theater.
It's been just to, poke at the government, make the Liberals nervous, also make the NDP nervous.
Make the NDP look bad because they've still voted to support the government.
Correct.
So they've announced to Canadians, they made a big song and dance of it about how Jagmeet's ripped up the agreement. They're no longer supporting the Liberals. but they're showing Canadians that they still are. So that erodes their vote even further because, again, it's the NDP that is still keeping this government in power. And now this government has just demonstrated how corrupt it is. It is so corrupt, and there is something so rotten going on that they would rather sacrifice days in the House than hand over whatever files the House has requested to the RCMP. What's in those files? And then the next question is, why would the NDP support this kind of corruption?
Well, and this is where it comes to. So the Bloc and the Conservatives, they will be, again, piling all these scandals up and then using the fact that the Liberals are not going to be providing these documents, assuming that they won't. And then they wrap that in the bow and they say, all right, here's the actual confidence motion. And they're going to list all of the scandals, most likely. The SCTC scandal, the Green Accelerator scandal, the ArriveCAN scandal, like all of them. And that is going to go into that confidence motion, in addition to the fact that no government legislation is actually getting passed and worked on.
Yeah, you might be asking yourself, why are they still in the House? What are they doing right now? I thought everything was shut down. That's incorrect. What has happened is because the Liberals, the government, is not producing the documents that the House requested, the Speaker has said, okay, no more government business. But we can still do opposition business. And this motion that they're discussing right now, that is opposition business. That's why they're still in the House.
Right. It's a motion of privilege. And why does question period still happen? Because that is not government business.
It's opposition business because question period is for the opposition to ask questions of the government. So that's why people are still in Parliament right now.
Correct. When they start Parliament, they go through, government orders of the day, and everything like that. And there's nothing because they have nothing that they're allowed to even work on.
Right.
So, and then any of the bills that they do work on are going to be opposition bills.
So
or
essentially private members' bills. Yeah.
So that's something to consider. But this is all a carefully orchestrated strategy to put a massive amount of weight on Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. So they are going to have to decide, the caucus as well as Jagmeet, do we want to be the party that will be seen from coast to coast, because the Bloc and the Conservatives are going to make sure every Canadian knows.
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to be the party that props up corruption? Because all of that is going to be laid bare. It may be the longest motion for a non-confidence vote we've actually heard, because they will just dump all of this into there. So, and then there's going to be debate on that as well. So they'll be talking about that. So this is the whole strategy here, is to put a massive amount of pressure on the NDP from both opposition parties when this is actually laid bare. And you're going to hear Elizabeth May get up and talk about this as well, because she agrees. She agrees with the Conservatives and the Bloc on the SDTC scandal. It's terrible. She's like, and she goes on to admit later in this debate, if this was started under Chrétien, it worked fine, and it worked fine under Harper.
That's right. It didn't become a problem until after 2017.
So when even Elizabeth May, who ideologically is joined at the hip with the Liberals, she's siding with the opposition, this is really bad. Now we get to Karina Gold losing her mind because she doesn't have anything to do in the House.
Afternoon. I want to talk briefly about what has been going on in the House of Commons for the past week. For Canadians, it's important that we get back to debating the issues that matter to them, and particularly when it comes to advancing important legislation. However, what's happening right now is something that every single Canadian should be extremely alarmed about.
No.
If that's where she ended her statement, I would completely agree with her. Because yes, absolutely, Canadians should be completely alarmed at the level of scandals that are being discussed in the House.
But the fact is, she's saying, we need to be working for Canadians, putting through the legislation that they want, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then you should hand over those files. Like, the only people in your way are you and your caucus mates. You guys are the ones that are preventing the government from being able to put forward business. All you have to do is give the files to the RCMP.
Right. And she's saying, well, we should be debating the issues that Canadians want us to. Newsflash, Karina, they are.
The Conservative Party of Canada has put forward a motion that would blur the lines of the independence of our democratic institutions, notably that between the legislative branches of government and the judicial branches of government. Every branch of government, with the exception of the legislature, is bound by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And now the House of Commons and parliamentarians have extraordinary powers and extraordinary privileges that they get to exercise, should be in the support of democracy. But what we are seeing the Conservatives do right now is attempt to use those extraordinary powers and extraordinary privileges to get around judicial oversight and to basically trample the charter rights of Canadians.
So I found it very interesting that Karina is so concerned about the motion that the Conservatives have put forward. She is so concerned about the impacts of what that motion allegedly does that she isn't bothering to tell Canadians what that motion is actually asking for, which is for them to turn over all of their documents related to the SDTC over to the RCMP. Now, she is trying to scare everybody by saying, well, they're using the tremendous powers of the House to circumvent, people's charters of rights and freedoms of all Canadians. And it is so rich. It is so rich considering what they did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, you literally use the power of the House to suspend people's charter of rights, to take their money, to arrest protesters.
And even before the Freedom Convoy, they were suspending our rights. Freedom of association. We weren't allowed to have people outside of your family in the home.
Freedom of assembly.
Right.
You weren't allowed to assemble. So you have all of this garbage that she is putting out there. And if you reduce it all to its absurdity, what she's saying is, well, they're saying that the RCMP should be investigating us, and we don't want them to do that because that would violate Canadians' Charter of Rights. They shouldn't be investigating us. We shouldn't allow them to do that.
I really think it's disgusting. Like, if there is something to be found in those files, which I think Canadians suspect that there is, I think it is disgusting that members of that caucus are standing up to defend this garbage.
And Canadians will not forget. They will not forget.
They have the power, and it is confirmed, and Parliament has extraordinary powers, to be able to compel documents. That is something that is agreed upon. But what they are doing for the first time, unprecedented in Canadian history, is compelling documents not for the use of parliamentarians, but to give directly to our federal police, to the RCMP. Now, there's a reason why the RCMP normally and have the responsibility to get a search warrant or to get a subpoena or to go to a judge to get information from Canadians, because they are bound to protect the charter rights of Canadians, and if they're going to suspend those rights, they have to have the authority to do that. But what the Conservatives are trying to do is to say that they are going to use the extraordinary privilege and power of Parliament to go around those very necessary and correct judicial oversight mechanisms, to go around the charter-protected rights of Canadians.
No. What's going on here is the opposition is saying that the government of this country has a duty to report criminal offenses where they suspect them. So the government of this country has all this information that is available to them that they should be giving over to the RCMP to stop Canadians from getting fleeced, because that's exactly what this slush fund is doing. It's taking our tax money and it's giving it to people who have conflicts of interest, who don't deserve it, etc., etc. It's stealing from Canadians is what it's doing. So that's why the opposition wants these documents given to the police.
Well, and this is the thing. She's essentially saying that if you run a business and if you find that someone's been stealing from you, if you take the evidence and go to the police and say, here's the evidence, that would be a charter violation. That's basically what she's trying to say here.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
And the other thing that I want to point out is, why are the Conservatives doing this? Because they learned from SNC-Lavalin. They 100% learned from that. They said, well, we don't trust that the government is actually going to comply when the RCMP asks them for documents. So we will use the supreme power of the House to make them give them the documents.
Right.
And this is what Karina's complaining about, is that, well, yeah, there's these checks and balances that we've been skirting around and we've been using to our advantage, and now they're using other rules to their advantage. That's not fair. That's what she's saying. So they just don't like that they've been caught and there's no way out.
Well, the other thing I find interesting that she said was that the House has the power to essentially compel documents produced for the other members of the House. All right, do that then.
And then
make it public, because it'll be on parliamentary record, which we can all access on ourcommons.ca. So why don't you do that?
Yeah, why don't you choose your poison, Karina? But all of this, like, you can see the Liberals are just in all-out panic now in how they're talking to reporters. They have no talking points other than this invented charter rights breach crap that's going on, which is blatant hypocrisy. It's unreal. And you have all of these scandals being laid bare. They are gearing up for the final push. And, we've confirmed this with people inside Parliament. So it's amazing that we were postulating this about this way the other night, and it was confirmed for us today. So this is what's coming. This is what's happening, and it's all going to blow up in the next couple of weeks. So, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up. I keep saying it, but this ride just keeps getting crazier and crazier, and I have a feeling we haven't seen anything yet.